Story 1: The Phone. I worked the overnight shift at a gas station on the edge of town for almost 3 years, and for most of that time, the worst thing that ever happened to me was a clogged coffee machine. I'm telling you that so you understand I wasn't a nervous person. After the night I'm about to describe, I am. My shift ran from 11 at night to 7 in the morning. The station sat at a crossroads where a state road met the edge of a residential grid, close enough to houses that I never felt truly out in the middle of nowhere, but far enough that after about 1 in the morning, the traffic just stopped. I knew the regulars. The third shift nurses, the long-haul guys who liked our coffee, the man who bought exactly 1 scratch ticket every night, and never scratched it where I could see. Overnights at a gas station turn strangers into a kind of family you never actually talk to. You learn their cars, their hours, the rhythm of them. So I noticed when someone didn't fit the rhythm. He came in a little after midnight. I'd never seen him before, which by itself meant nothing. We got new faces all the time off the state road. He was ordinary in every way I could later describe to the police, which is to say I could describe almost nothing about him. He walked the aisles for a while, picked up a bag of chips and a soda, and brought them to the counter. And then he just stayed. He leaned on the counter and started talking. Small talk at first, the weather, how quiet it was. Did I work here every night? I answered the way you do, polite and short, ringing up his items, hoping the transaction would end the conversation the way it usually does. It didn't. He paid, and he kept standing there, and the talking kept going, and it slowly stopped feeling like small talk. He asked how late I worked. He asked if I was here alone. He asked if my shift was the same nights every week. I want to be fair to him, in the way I was being fair to him in the moment, because that fairness is exactly the thing that keeps you standing at a counter longer than you should. I told myself he was lonely. The overnight world is full of lonely people, and a gas station at 1 in the morning is where some of them come to feel less alone for a few minutes. I talked plenty of them down off a bad night before. I figured he was one more, and I kept my answers vague and kept waiting for him to run out of things to say. Eventually he did. He gathered up his chips and his soda, told me to have a good night in a way that lingered a half second too long, and walked out to the lot. I felt the relief you feel when a room gets back to its normal size. I watched him through the big front windows, the way you watch anyone leave at that hour, just to see them go. He got into a dark sedan parked off to the side, away from the pumps, in the corner of the lot where the light from the canopy doesn't quite reach. And then he didn't drive away. He just sat there, a shape behind a windshield, engine off. I told myself he was eating his chips. People do that. They buy food and eat it in the lot before they drive. I went back to my tasks. I refilled the cigarette rack behind the counter. I wiped down the coffee station. I started a fresh pot because the nurses would be through around 2. The whole time, the sedan sat in the corner of the lot, dark and still, and I kept glancing at it the way you keep touching a sore tooth. Then the store phone rang. The store phone almost never rings overnight. It's the landline behind the counter, the number printed on the receipts, and on a faded sign by the road, and probably on 100 old listings online. During the day, it rings for vendors and the district manager. At 1 in the morning, it does not ring. I picked it up out of pure reflex and said the name of the station. A man's voice said, "You look better when you're not behind the glass." I didn't understand it at first. It was such a strange, flat sentence that my brain tried to file it as a wrong number, a drunk, a prank. I said, "Excuse me," and he said, the blue shirt, it's nice." I was wearing a blue shirt, and the moment he said it, I looked up, through the front windows, across the lot, to the dark sedan in the corner. I couldn't see him, but the angle was right. From that corner, looking back at the lit-up store, he could see me perfectly, standing behind the counter, lit like a stage, and I couldn't see a thing past my own reflection. He had called the store's own number, the one printed on the receipt I had just handed him, and he was sitting in the dark watching me hold the phone he had called. I'd like to tell you I did something clever. What I actually did was hang up, which solved nothing, and then stand there with my heart going while I tried to think. The phone rang again immediately. I let it ring. I went to the front doors and I turned the deadbolt, which we were supposed to be able to do for safety, but which I had never once done, and the click of that bolt was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Then I went back behind the counter, got down low so I wasn't framed in the window, and called the police on my cell. While I was whispering to the dispatcher, the store phone kept ringing, stopping, ringing again. At one point, I picked it up just to make it stop, and before I could say anything, the voice said, very calmly, "Why did you lock the door?" I already paid, like I'd been rude, like I'd hurt his feelings. I put the phone down on the counter without hanging up, and I stayed crouched, and I watched the bottom edge of the front windows. The minutes after that stretched out in a way I can't really describe to anyone who hasn't waited for police in an empty building. I had the dispatcher in one ear, telling me a unit was on the way, and I had the store phone lying face up on the counter, and every so often the voice on it would say something into the quiet of the store. He talked the way you'd talk to someone you knew well. He said it was cold out. He said he wished I'd come back to the counter so he could see me. He asked, almost gently, whether I was scared, and when I didn't answer, he said that I didn't need to be, that he just liked watching me work, that he'd been doing it for a while, and it always calmed him down. I lay on the floor behind the counter with my cheek against the rubber mat and listened to a stranger tell me he'd been watching me for a while, and I understood that the man who'd been leaning on my counter making small talk an hour earlier had already known the answers to every question he'd asked me. Then his voice stopped coming from the phone, and that was worse than the talking. A few seconds later, a shadow crossed the bottom of the front windows. He had walked up from the lot, and he was standing right at the glass doors, close, and I heard the handle move, the soft rattle of someone testing a locked door, patient, unhurried. He didn't bang on it. He didn't shout. He just tried the handle a few times, the way you'd check your own door out of habit, and then I saw the shape of him lean in close to the glass, and the store phone, still off the hook on the counter, carried the faint sound of him breathing. The police came fast, and their lights swung across the lot, and by the time they were in the door, the sedan was gone. They took my statement. They were kind about it and honest that there wasn't much they could do. He hadn't broken anything. He'd bought chips and made a phone call, and being unsettling isn't a crime. They told me to call them if he came back. Here's the part I keep coming back to. A few weeks later, my manager mentioned, just in passing, that the store's overnight line had been getting hang-up calls for over a month before that night. Calls that came in, stayed silent or breathed and disconnected, always on certain nights, my nights. The day crew had assumed it was a busted auto dialer and stopped logging them. Nobody had thought to tell the person those silent calls were landing on, which was me, alone, at the counter, picking up an empty line at 2 a.m, and saying hello into nothing and assuming it was a glitch. He hadn't found me that evening by chance. He had been calling the store for weeks, listening for which voice answered, learning the schedule we taped helpfully in the front window for the day crew, the one that listed every overnight by name and night so the regulars would know who'd be on. He hadn't been calling the store at all. He'd been calling to find out which nights were mine. I asked my manager to take the schedule out of the window after that. He did eventually, after I asked 3 times. I don't work overnights anymore, and I never answer a number I don't know. Story 2. The far pump. The station I worked at was the last thing for 20 miles in either direction. It sat alone on a 2-lane highway with fields on one side and a dark wall of tree line on the other, the kind of place that exists only because people need gas before the long empty stretch and not for any other reason. There were 8 pumps under a tall lit canopy, a small store, and around the back a single outdoor restroom you needed a key for. After about 11 at night, I was the only person there, and sometimes I'd go an hour without seeing a single car. You'd think that would be boring, and most nights it was. But there's a thing that happens to your senses when you're the only lit-up point in a lot of darkness. You become very aware of the edges of the light. The canopy throws a bright circle over the pumps, and past that circle the lot fades to gray and then to black, and your eyes are always drifting out to that edge, watching the place where the light gives up. The car showed up a little after 1 in the morning, an older sedan, faded paint, and it pulled in slow and parked at the far pump, the one at the very end of the row, right at the edge of the light. Nobody got out. The headlights went dark, and it just sat there. This is normal, mostly. People pull in to check a map, to make a call, to rest their eyes before the long dark stretch ahead. I gave it 10 minutes, then 20, watching between tasks, waiting for someone to come in and prepay or pump and leave. Nobody did. The car sat at the far pump with its lights off and didn't move, and I told myself the driver had fallen asleep. It happens all the time out there. Tired people pull off the highway and drift off. I almost went out to knock on the window and check, the way I'd done before for sleepers, and something stopped me. I didn't have a name for it yet. I just didn't go. Instead, I watched the camera feed. We had a handful of cameras, and one of them covered the far pumps. I pulled it up on the little monitor behind the counter, and I could see the sedan there, gray and grainy. And as I watched, the driver's door opened, and a man got out. He didn't come toward the store. He stood by his car, at the edge of the light, facing the building, and then he did something I still don't fully have words for. He started to move, and his movements matched mine. I don't mean that loosely. I had a rag in my hand and I was wiping down the counter, and on the screen by his car, he raised his arm and moved it back and forth against the side of his sedan, slow like he was wiping it. I stopped. He stopped. I set the rag down and stood up straight to look at the monitor properly, and on the screen he straightened up too. I lifted my hand to my face, not really thinking, and the gray figure by the far pump lifted his hand to his face. There was a delay to it, a half-second lag, like a bad echo, like he was watching me through the same glass I was so brightly lit behind and copying what he saw. I backed away from the window then, out of the bright frame of it, and stood in the one corner behind the chip display where I knew the front glass didn't show me. My heart was going, and on the monitor, the man by the far pump stopped copying me because he could no longer see me to copy, and for a moment he just stood there, head turning slightly, scanning the lit-up store like he was looking for where I'd gone. That was the thing that broke whatever calm I had left. As long as he was mimicking me, it had felt like a strange, sad game. The moment he started searching for me, it became hunting. He left the far pump. On the camera, I watched him walk, slow and steady, across the dark lot toward the store, and I lost him at the edge of the canopy light, where the angle of the camera gave out. For a long minute, I didn't know where he was, and a gas station store is mostly windows, which at night means it's mostly mirror. I could see my own frightened reflection laid over the black lot, and almost nothing of what was actually out there. Then his face came out of that blackness, right up against the front glass, inches from it, cupped hands against the window, looking in. He moved along the front of the store that way, window by window, his hands and the pale smear of his face sliding across each pane, looking for me behind the displays. I crouched in my blind corner and tracked him by the squeak of his palms on the glass. And I noticed, for the first time really, a smell that had been creeping into the store for the last hour without me placing it. It came from the back, from the direction of the rear stockroom and the door to the outdoor restroom. It was the smell of someone who had been outside too long, sweat and cold and earth. I had been smelling a person. I went to the back carefully, and the outdoor restroom door, the one that locked from a key we kept behind the counter, was propped open a few inches with a flattened soda can. Inside, on the floor, there were food wrappers, a lot of them, and a folded square of cardboard, and the smell was strong and human and recent. Someone had been using that restroom as a room, not for one night, for a while. I went back to the counter fast and I locked the front doors, and I called for help, the non-emergency line first, and then, when I heard my own voice shaking, the actual police. The dispatcher asked me to stay on the line and asked if the man was trying to get in, and I told her the truth, which was that he had stopped trying the front, and I didn't know where he'd gone, and that not knowing was the worst part. While we talked, I kept my eyes moving across the bank of camera feeds, front lot, far pumps, side, rear. He wasn't on any of them. A man had been pressed against my windows a minute ago, and now there was no man anywhere on any camera, which meant he was in one of the gaps between them, and the biggest gap was the dead ground behind the building, by the propped restroom door, by the smell. Then, on the camera that covered the rear delivery door, the man at the far pump finally moved on his own, without copying me, and he walked, unhurried, not toward the store, but around the side of it, toward the back, toward the tree line and the propped restroom door, like he was going home. And on a different camera, the one that covered the rear delivery door, I watched another figure come out of the tree line behind the station. So there were at least two of them, or one of them moved in ways I couldn't track. The same sick uncertainty I've heard from everyone this has ever happened to. They drifted toward the back of the building, into the dead ground behind it, where no camera reached well and no light reached at all. The police took a while to get out there. It was 20 miles of dark road for them too. By the time the cruiser's lights came up the highway, the sedan at the far pump was empty and the back of the station was empty, and whoever had been there was gone into the trees. But behind the station, in the scrub at the edge of the tree line, they found where someone had been living. A tarp tied between two branches, a sleeping bag, damp, a camp stove, and a plastic grocery bag, and inside it, a stack of our own discarded receipts, and the old paper shift logs we threw in the dumpster out back, the ones that listed who closed and who opened, going back weeks. Some of them had marks next to certain dates, my dates. He had been pulling our garbage out of the dumpster and reading it. One of the officers told me, in the careful voice they use when they're deciding how much to say, that the spot had a clear sight line to the back of the store and to the employee parking, and that from up in that scrub, a person could watch the whole rear of the building without ever being caught on a camera. They figured he'd been out there at least 2 weeks. He'd been close enough, every one of my shifts, that if I'd ever stepped out the back for air, I'd have been standing a stone's throw from him in the dark and never known it. He hadn't wanted gas, and he hadn't wanted the register. He had wanted to know my schedule, and we had been throwing my schedule away where he could find it. I think about that more than I think about the man copying me at the far pump. The copying was strange, and it scared me in the moment. But the receipts in the bag scared me for months, because they meant it was never random, and it had been going on far longer than the one night I noticed. Story 3. The Lock-In. I close a gas station by myself most nights, and closing is a routine you could do in your sleep. You shut down the pumps from the console. You walk the lot and bring in the trash. You count the drawer, drop the cash in the safe, wipe the counters, kill most of the lights, and lock the front doors behind you on your way out. The whole thing takes maybe 20 minutes, and I'd done it hundreds of times. The danger of a routine is that you stop really looking at the things you're doing. You trust the routine to be the same as it always is. That's the gap someone can fit themselves into. It was a slow Tuesday, close to midnight, which was our cutoff. I'd had maybe 2 customers in the last hour. I started the close the way I always did, and when I went to bring in the trash and check the back, I noticed 2 small things that I waved off at the time and have replayed 1,000 times since. The first was that the door to the back stockroom was open a few inches. I always keep it shut. I told myself I'd left it open hauling boxes earlier and didn't remember. The second was a can of soda standing on a shelf in the back hallway, sitting by itself in a spot where we don't stock soda, and when I picked it up to throw it away, it was cold. Not room temperature, cold like it had come out of a cooler not long before. I stood there holding a cold can of soda in a place a cold can of soda had no reason to be, and my brain did what brains do, which is build the most boring story available. A customer set it down and forgot it. I'd restocked the cooler recently and grabbed an extra. Something. I put it in the trash and I kept closing, because the routine wanted to be finished. I counted the drawer, I dropped the cash, I wiped the counters. There was one more moment in there I keep going back to. As I wiped down the far end of the counter, near the door to the back hallway, I had the brief, certain feeling that the temperature was wrong, that a thread of cold air was moving past me from the back of the store, the kind you get when a door is open somewhere behind you. I stood still and felt it on the back of my neck, and I told myself it was the cooler compressor kicking on, which it does, which makes exactly that kind of draft. I did not turn around and walk the back again. I had already checked the back. The routine had cleared the back. I trusted the routine more than I trusted my own neck, and I kept wiping. I went to the front, and I locked the front doors, turning the deadbolt, the solid final click of the night being over. And the moment after that click, while I was standing at the locked door with my keys in my hand, the door chime went off. We had one of those electronic chimes that dings whenever the front door opens, a little 2-tone sound you stop hearing after your first week. It dinged, one clear ding, behind me from a door I was standing in front of and had just locked and had not opened, which meant the chime had not been triggered by the front door at all. It had been triggered by the back door. Someone had just moved through the back of the store. I turned around and looked down the length of the store, over the tops of the aisles, toward the back. Everything was still. I'd already killed the rear lights, so the back third of the store was in shadow, the aisles standing like dark walls. I told myself, even then, that the chime had glitched, that a moth had set it off, that the back door had a draft. And then, over the top of the second aisle, I saw the shadow of a head move. Just for a second, someone was standing in the back of my locked store, between the aisles, in the dark. I want to explain how the timing of this works, because I tortured myself over it. When I'd checked the back during my close, the stockroom door had been open, and I had glanced in and seen nothing. But the back of that store is full of blind spots, tall shelving and a walk-in cooler and a stockroom with a dozen places a person could stand out of sight. He had been there the whole time I was closing. He had watched me count the drawer and lock the doors. He had let me lock us in together. I did the only smart thing I did that night. I did not go toward him. I went behind the counter. I crouched. I made sure the safe was shut, and I called the police. And this time I didn't bother with keeping my voice down, because he already knew exactly where I was. I told them I was locked inside the store with an intruder, and I gave the address twice. The dispatcher told me a unit was 6 minutes out. 6 minutes is nothing when you're waiting for a kettle, and it is a very long time when you are crouched behind a counter, listening to someone you can't see moving around the store you locked yourself into. I could hear him, not rushing. I heard the soft scuff of his shoes on the tile, somewhere in the middle aisles, and then a pause, and then the small sound of him picking something off a shelf and setting it back down, like he was browsing, like it was the middle of the afternoon, and he had all the time in the world. He never called out, and he never asked me for the money, and he never tried the safe, and the longer that went on, the more frightened I got, because a person who wants the register does the register and leaves, and this man wanted to be in here with me in the dark, and money had nothing to do with it. Then he came out. He stepped out from the end of the last aisle into the front of the store, into the dim light, and he started walking toward the counter, slow, taking his time, the way you'd walk if you had all night and no reason to hurry. I didn't recognize him. He didn't say anything. He didn't run. He didn't lunge. He just walked, and the slowness of it was the worst part, because it told me he wasn't panicking. He wasn't a confused drunk who'd wandered in. He was doing a thing he had decided to do. I had my keys in my hand. I went over the only plan a brain can make in 3 seconds. The front door I had just locked was between me and outside, and the deadbolt needed a key from the inside too. I got to the door before he got to the counter. I jammed the key in, I turned it, and I went out into the lot and pulled the door shut behind me and locked it again from the outside, with him still inside. I had locked the store to keep myself in, and now I used the same lock to keep him in, and I stood in the middle of the bright empty lot under the canopy and watched him through the glass as he reached the locked door and stopped and looked at me through it, calm, like none of this was a surprise to him. The police arrived a few minutes later, and they took him out of the store, and I gave my statement standing by the pumps with a blanket somebody put on my shoulders, even though it wasn't cold. It was when they searched him that the night got worse instead of better, because in his jacket they found a folded sheet of paper, and on it was a handwritten list of gas stations. A dozen of them, all over the county, the small ones, the ones with a single clerk overnight. And next to a few of the names were little notes about hours and staffing. And my store was on the list, and my store was circled. One of the officers went quiet when he read it, and later he told me that a couple of the other stations on that page had reported odd things over the past months. A clerk who'd felt watched, a back door found unlocked, a customer who lingered past close. Nothing anyone had been able to act on, nothing that had connected until that list connected it. He hadn't wandered in by accident, drawn by a cold can of soda and an open door. He had chosen the store. He had come in before close and found a blind spot and waited for the deadbolt to turn, because being locked in with the clerk was the entire point, and he had done enough of it at enough other stores to keep a list. The open door and the cold can weren't his mistakes. They were the only warnings I got, and I had thrown the can in the trash and finished my routine. I still close stores, but now the very first thing I do, before I count a single dollar, is walk the whole back with the lights on, every aisle, the cooler, the stockroom, all of it. And I do not turn that final deadbolt until I am the only person I can possibly be locked in with.